All right, welcome everybody. We are so glad you've joined us today. My name is Kate Cimino, and I serve as Executive Director of the Citizens League. And I know some of you joining us today over lunch may be familiar with the Citizens League, and some of you may be new with us. So welcome. Thanks for being here. Thanks for taking the time to step into our little Zoom room and be together and learn about a really important issue and chat. Citizens League, as some of you know, is a nonprofit organization, and I want to really thank our awesome staff team. We are a mighty team of 6 who work to make this event and all of our Citizens League work possible. So thanks to our great team. As you may know, the Citizens League is nonpartisan. We like to sometimes say multi-partisan because that's a word that to us means that people of different perspectives can join together, can be together, learn about each other's perspectives and connect together. So what the Citizens League does in this multi-partisan space is we help people get connected to policy issues. And these are really community issues that impact everyone, and get involved in shaping good solutions as well. And so we do this through educational events like this one. We have paid internships for students of color and Indigenous students to work and learn at the state capitol and bring their voice to work at the state capitol. And we also have opportunities for people to work together on policy projects and community work. We, as a nonpartisan and multi-partisan organization, we really believe in the importance of bringing different views together. And that is a key part of what we do. We really are committed to ensuring that different personal and political perspectives and ideologies can also come into the space, and that new voices can also be welcomed into the conversational and policymaking space. Mind Opener is our longtime series of educational programs and conversations that Citizens League has been doing for many, many years. We call these policy learning events, and we hope they open doors for digging in a little bit deeper on an issue, doing some thinking, maybe leaving with a spark of interest that you chat about with someone in your life or explore a little bit further. And so we see these as not a debate, but more of an exploration, and hope that it sparks some interest for you. So I really want to thank you for attending today. And in particular, I want to thank those of you who made a donation to Citizens League when you registered. We appreciate that. As I said, we are a nonprofit organization, and your contribution today and maybe even in the future helps us to be successful in our work. So thank you. I also really want to thank Blue Cross and Blue Shield of Minnesota. They have been a fantastic partner for Mind Opener for so long. They have helped us to explore and develop some really neat conversations, particularly around how different policy issues and community issues connect back to our health and well-being as people in communities and individuals, in families and neighborhoods. And it's just been really fun to explore a lot of different angles on that question with Blue Cross. So just really want to thank Blue Cross in helping us not only develop the series, but bring it to a really broad audience through these virtual programs. So with that, thank you again for coming, and I am thrilled to introduce my colleague Blanca Martinez Gavinia, who is our Director of Public Policy at the Citizens League. And Blanca is going to introduce today's program and panel, and I'll invite you to take it away.
Thank you so much, Kate, for that introduction, and thank you all for taking the time in this beautiful day to spend with us. We are enjoying, one of those last few beautiful summer days. So thank you for taking the time to be with us today. I am so thrilled to introduce with us today 2 amazing panelists who are gonna be with us to have a discussion and to really dig deep into what is it that we are looking at in terms of our environment here in our beautiful state of Minnesota. So first, I am going to introduce Huda Ahmed, who is partner consultant with Minnesota Upstream and principal consultant with Transformative Solutions. Huda, thank you for being with us today. And
thank you for having me.
Thank you. And next, we're going to introduce Heidi Roop, who is the director of the University of Minnesota Climate Adaptation Partnership and an assistant professor of climate science. Heidi, thank you for being with us today.
Thank you for having me.
Well, let's get started. Let's get started. And please remember that if you have any comments or any questions, feel free to use the chat. We'll be monitoring those, and there will be time at the end for you to ask some questions and for us to address maybe some topics that have been brought up throughout the conversation. So let's get started. If both of you can tell us a little bit more about your background, your work, and why this topic is important to you. So maybe Huda, let's start with you.
Yes. So my background, I'm trained in public health. I've spent the last a little over 15 years. I've been saying 15 years for a while, and I'm sure time has passed, so maybe closer to 20 years, working on equity issues. Started out really focused on public health, but have been the past 10 or so years have gone upstream of public health with the idea and thought and research supports that our health is really shaped by all the different things that act upon us, systems and environment and policies that act upon us and shape our daily lives. And so that's where I've been working to achieve equity, is how do we transform those systems and environment and policies and co-create new ones or make the ones that currently exist better, so that everyone in Minnesota and elsewhere in the country have better quality of life. So I would say my expertise and focus has really been in co-creation and power sharing towards better environments and policies and systems for everyone. And what I really, what pulls me to this project, and I've applied the lens of co-creation to so many other topics, and what really pulled me to this particular work is A, it was something I knew very little about several years ago when we got started, but B, what I think about the kind of world that I want to leave for my children or for Minnesota's children, just really thinking about that is, how do we want to leave the state for our children? And our children's children, and I think, you know, wisdom on how to make really great, better natural place that we can leave for one happen is within all our various communities in Minnesota. So how do we pull that out? And so that's what's attracted me and pulled me into this project, and I'm excited to be here to share more with you guys about that.
Thank you so much, Huda. Thank you for sharing. Heidi, can you tell us a little bit more about your background, your work, and why this topic is important to you?
Yeah, great. Thank you so much. So I am an assistant professor at the University of Minnesota, and I also serve as the state's extension specialist for climate change and adaptation. So what that broadly means is that I've been fortunate enough to sort of come up with the next phase of a university-wide program called the Climate Adaptation Partnership. And we use climate science and evidence, and importantly, community perspective to think about how we prepare for the changes in climate that we know we've set in motion across the state of Minnesota's communities, industries, and economies. So we're doing that through a variety of research projects and extension programming, and some very ambitious goals to get dedicated professionals and educators on the landscape throughout the state, helping communities define and identify the solutions and the changes that they need to see shaped in their communities, and effectively lead to the policies and the resources that would enable implementation and innovation in terms of how we create and shape our communities today for tomorrow. So it's been really fun to think about how to bring this new capacity to the state of Minnesota and really sit as a national leader in thinking about how we leverage our land grant and extension system, where there's a deep infrastructure that already exists across the state, but really pivoting that to community-based perspectives on planning and preparedness for climate impacts. And so why do I care about that? I'm a climate scientist by training. I've been very fortunate to have a career that has taken me around the world, from places like Antarctica to the Arctic, to actually collect and generate some of the foundational records we have about Earth's changing climate, and how we know that the climate we're living through today is profoundly different from that of the past. And we know, quite frankly, unequivocally, what is causing that profound difference, and that is us. humans. And so I bring in a research perspective, but quite frankly, I'm also a person. We often tend to forget that when we talk about scientists and science. And we know, and I firmly believe that while we understand we're confronting an enormous challenge as a society and for an environment, we are also confronting one of the greatest opportunities that we have had collectively as a society to confront this challenge and think about how we can use it to multi-solve for a range of problems and challenges that our communities face, whether those are related to health and well-being, structural racism. Climate change is an unfortunate opportunity for us to confront a lot of challenges and think about how we can collaborate and coordinate and innovate to create a better future. And so that is why I'm now doing the work I'm doing, still generating climate records from fun places like Antarctica, but really pivoting towards community-centered solutions to really embrace this opportunity that we have and think about how we do that uniquely in Minnesota and set a standard and an example for the rest of the country and the rest of the world.
Thank you so much, Heidi. And I appreciate the framework in seeing this as an opportunity and for it to be approached from a community-centered way. And Huda, that is in a way something that you have been doing with Minnesota Upstream in bringing awareness and connection to place. Can you tell us a little bit more about what Minnesota Upstream is? What is the campaign doing? And why does it matter? Why is this important to Minnesotans?
Yeah. So initially when we had started thinking about this initiative and this question about how do we leave a better natural place and natural world for our future generations, we thought it was going to lead us to, policy or legislation or, but then when we started doing more research, bringing people together, talking to people, across the state from diverse political spectrums, as well as ethnicities and geographies, and experts both on, different sides of the issue, what we learned is that the political discourse about the environment is mired in division, shame, blame, and othering. And so what we heard back and the recommendation that we got back is that we needed to go upstream of politics and work on culture. And so that's what Upstream is. Additionally, what we heard was that Minnesotans are hungry for a new way to connect on the issue that's rooted in positivity and pride of place. And Upstream, that's the second thing Upstream is doing, is filling that need. We're attempting to instill a new narrative in people's minds that's based on common trust, recognition of a shared value, and an expectation that we as Minnesotans care for our places. We know the best way to care for our place, and we believe that other Minnesotans feel the same way. So when Heidi talked about, uniquely Minnesotan, we're really leaning into that uniquely Minnesotan piece. And we're actively working on taking the urgency off the table as we engage people. We want to meet them where they are and help them find their next way to care for Minnesota. And when you hear people, we're working both with organizations as well to share stories from organizations as well as individuals, so that when one organization sees another or what another organization is doing in terms of caring for place, they think, oh, we can do the same thing or we can do one better, and apply that to the individual level as well. And lastly, but definitely most importantly, the campaign is really filling an important and missing piece in the environmental work that's happening. And that's building on-ramps and connections for people who have been left aside or left behind or actively villainized by the current narrative. So think, we're in Minnesota, so think about communities that have experienced inequities. Think about rural communities, think about industry communities as well. So we're actively working on engaging, the mining community and the forestry community and a rural farmer, as well as folks on the north side of Minneapolis that really have a pride in their neighborhood and are caring for it, and trying to uplift all of those stories together and weave them together in a way that demonstrates we all love our place of Minnesota and we are caring for it, and we're all part of it, and we can do the next thing better whatever that next is for whatever organization or for whatever individual.
Thank you, Huda. I appreciate, and I really love that phrase that you mentioned about it being uniquely Minnesotan. I think
Heidi said that, and I just ran with it.
Or Heidi said that. Well, I love that phrase. I love that we're just connecting. And Heidi, I know that, of course, in coming to that place, we know that Minnesota is known for the beautiful lakes, for our natural environment. And I want to talk a little bit more with you as to what is happening here in Minnesota. How is our environment changing? And what can we expect maybe in the 10, 20 years, whatever is the timeline that you see? What are some of the things that we're going to see change in this beautiful place that we call home?
Great. So this is the part where the climate scientist in me has to refrain from wanting to list off a range of facts and figures, although I will try to intersperse those into my response here. But I think to stick with the theme of, uniquely Minnesotan, of course, when we look at the globe, we know that the global average temperature has increased by 2 degrees Fahrenheit since the late 1800s. That's our global average change. To put that in context of some of the policy targets that we have globally, we are trying, under the efforts of the adoption of the Paris Climate Agreement, to limit warming to 2.7 degrees Fahrenheit. That's 1.5 degrees Celsius. So we are well on our way towards overreaching that global policy target. We are trying efforts to limit warming to well below 2 degrees Celsius. And we can talk more about where we are on those. But for Minnesota, we are, of course, punching above our weight because we're above average here. Maybe not in a good context in this way, but overall, the state of Minnesota for our annual average temperature change since the late 1800s is about 3 degrees Fahrenheit. Importantly, when we start to unpack the differences between seasons, like our summers and our winters, we see that our winters are warming faster, in fact, faster than most other parts of the country. And that has to do with our unique continental geography and also where we are located in terms of our northern latitude. We also have very clear gradients from south to north across the state, right? As we go further north in latitude, we see the winters warming faster. We see those temperature changes increase the further north you go. And so again, these are all things that we expect from a climate science sort of physics perspective. But we're getting warmer, our winters are warming faster, and we are definitely seeing more warm and wet years. So we are seeing that sort of the warmer conditions, the wetter conditions, and then, however, to like throw the big wrench in the works, the challenge with climate change, and this is not necessarily unique only to Minnesota, but as we think about what we're preparing for in the future, we have to be prepared to hold 2 really difficult truths simultaneously. And that is that we can expect it to be drier and hotter, but also warmer and wetter. And so we need to be prepared to sort of live at the extremes, or at a minimum, be able to be prepared to navigate both of those extremes, the drought and the wet, the drought and the flood. And that is not something that is uncommon in the state, right? We are a state where we do experience periodic drought. We have not yet seen the signal, the sort of climate change signal emerge for the frequency of drought. But we do see that extremes, the sort of oscillating between extremes, is a signal that we're seeing emerge across the Midwest region. And so that may not sound profound or important, but it really challenges how we manage so many aspects of what we value as humans and the ways in which we interact and are connected with the environment. Warmer winters are not great for pest and disease burden. It reduces snowpack. In the future, we expect there to be around 60 days fewer per winter with snow on the ground exceeding 1 inch, which is not what our uniquely Minnesotan past was like, most certainly. So that stresses water resources for agriculture and for people. So we see impacts on cultural heritage and tradition, health and well-being. We also expect, and I think this is one of the big human health connections, is we expect more of those extreme days over 100 degrees Fahrenheit. We're expecting over 10 to 15 more days per summer where we're in excess of that 100 degree Fahrenheit threshold, which makes it really challenging for human health, but also stress on animals, stress on infrastructure, stress on the systems upon which we rely. And so we could go on and on with the range of impacts, but I think the point is very clear. If we do the sort of climate change cliff notes for Minnesota and also globally, when we think about the broad context around climate change, is that we know it's us. So we know the driver. We know that it's here. We're not talking about a far off distant future. We're talking about changes that we are living through and experiencing today. We understand the impacts of climate change are everywhere around the world. Those impacts and who experiences them and how they experience them is of course not equal. We also know that we've committed to change. So even if we turned off the tap of the driver of this change, which is the production of human-caused greenhouse gas emissions, burning fossil fuels, right, producing carbon dioxide, methane, nitrous oxide, even if we turn off the tap of all of those today, we know that the global climate system is still going to have to respond to the emissions that we've already produced, meaning once you emit, you commit. And so we've made a commitment to change. And so what that means is two things. We know the more we emit, the worse it will get, meaning the warmer it will get, and the impacts that stem from that warmth will increase, right? The negative impacts of the flood, the frequency and drought of those wildfires that impact our air quality, right? Even if they're not occurring in Minnesota, they're occurring elsewhere, right? Climate change really needs no passport. And so we have to be thinking about what are those impacts. We live in a globalized economy as well. A hurricane in one place can wreak havoc on an industry at the heart of Minnesota's economy. So we know that, right? The more we emit, the worse it gets. We also know that we have to reduce our risks through preparing, right? We have to not only reduce emissions, but we have to prepare for those changes we've set in motion. That's called adaptation. That's really at the heart of the work that our group does, the preparation piece. And then I think most importantly is that we still choose. So we still choose what the future holds. And that is a unique opportunity that we have as a society, that we have as individuals, that we have as leaders in our communities, in our businesses, in whatever industry, identity, or community or faith group that you're part of. We still have to choose, and we still have an opportunity. And we, of course, it's urgent, right? It's urgent that we all find ourselves in some aspect or facet of solutions. And I think that's part of what we'll continue to unpack in this conversation. And so to quickly wrap that all up in a neat bow, as hard as it is, we know we're observing change today. We expect it to get worse in Minnesota across impacts of people, economies, the natural environment, right? All of those are intimately connected. And I think just sort of the last thing I'll say that of course, as we think about effective risk management for a climate change future, we do need more than sort of the basic little facts that I've tossed out today. And as part of that, one of the things that the state of Minnesota and the legislature supported our group to do at the university was actually generate really fine, detailed projections about future climate risks for the state of Minnesota. And then help communities learn how to use and integrate and do scenario planning and risk management using those data and using them effectively. And so that is one of the things that we are working on. That is uniquely Minnesotan. There aren't many states that are advancing their understanding of their unique place-specific climate risks moving forward. And so we're in the process of, we're generating the data now. They'll be available next year along with community and industry-based trainings and workshops and scenario planning efforts. And so that's a bit of a pitch in terms of if you really want to understand what your community's risks are. We have some of that information available already, and we'll have even more cutting edge information and capacity to help people use that information coming forward. So there's lots that's in the works to help us really characterize our risks and develop the solutions that work in place and for community across our state.
Thank you, Heidi. That is all really important information. And as you mentioned, all of kind of the future realities and the current realities that we're facing right now. I know that you, Huda, have been collecting stories from around the state as to what these realities are. So if you are able to talk a little bit more as to the stories and how people are connecting to their natural spaces, and if there are any specific stories that stood out to you, or if you can talk about some of the impact of this work that you are doing with Minnesota Upstream.
Yeah. So, I mean, there are certainly themes that are, emerging. And the way Upstream is built is, yes, we're out collecting stories and asking people to share their stories, but our leadership, we have a leadership team and strategic advisors that work with us that are also from various backgrounds that we're trying to reach, that also have stories of their own. And so together we're leaning on their connections too and pulling us into their communities. So what we've seen so far in terms of themes of the stories that we're hearing is that people have intense pride in Minnesota's natural places. One story that strikes me is, I think it was, an immigrant woman or man actually talking about how when he's landing in Minnesota, it's just breathtakingly beautiful. And he always asks himself, how did I land here? How did I luck out and land here? And we're talking about just the natural places. And they want to talk about how they appreciate it and how they use it and how they, just celebrate how beautiful Minnesota is. We also, people have a common desire to care for our places, but the way they enter the conversation is different. So sharing stories with common values, connecting across difference is critical. And thirdly, people respond better to invitations and inspiration, and really block out, you should do this or you should do that to care for place, and really want to hear more about. One of our strategic advisors talks about people like me do things like this. And so that's what we're really trying to demonstrate, is all these different people doing various things and to inspire others like them to do the same thing. And so the content that gets, the most amount of engagement and best response is really when we highlight other people doing those things. And then, so just to share, there's so many stories that I'm trying to pick and choose. For example, I talked about the people that are, shaping this with us. So we have a farm, a generational, a man named Bradane and his wife. They're up in north central Minnesota and are, generational goat cheese farmers. And raise the goat there, make the cheese there, and then bring it down to the cities. Deeply Catholic. And then we have, a half hour Hmong American Farmers Association, Jansen Hang, who also is a farmer, is a newer immigrant, is also farming. And to bring them together and hear them share stories about how they care about, using sustainability techniques to farm so that it's a better. It adds to the the beauty and resilience of our natural places is exciting. And then there's like a Somali woman farmer also out in west central Minnesota who's really leaning into caring for place and is excited to be out there. And it's really about how do I farm in a way that leaves the earth in a better way and doesn't take from it. And then we have a miner out in Eveleth, Minnesota, who's mining but is trying to really share the story about, yes, they mine, but they also very much care about place and celebrate it and take care of their environment to the best of their capability. And so those are the kind of stories we're trying to weave together so that eventually we can shift from, there's people that care about the environment and there's people that don't, and really kind of till the ground for, we all care about it. So now how do we move forward?
Thank you, Huda. And as you talked about kind of like the stories that we tell ourselves, and there's a really big conversation that is happening about how scientists like you, Heidi, talk about these realities. You just spend some time telling us about what is happening in Minnesota, what are some of adaptation and risk management that you're hoping to bring forth, so as a state we can be better prepared. But can you talk about, when you are sharing these stories, when you're sharing these facts, what are some of the challenges that you face as a scientist? And maybe if you can talk about some tools that we can use to discuss climate change that can bring people together.
That's a great question and a difficult one to answer, but I think, you know, if I were to sum it up, and again, this is, I'm always sort of reticent to lead with the sort of question around like, what are we experiencing? And I think this is a good reflection to think about how to be a better storyteller in these opportunities. But I think, you know, really facts and figures don't change hearts and minds, right? People do, and stories do. And we want to share experiences and be connected to one another. And so I think embedding, right, no longer is it, in my opinion, a science story, right? This is a society story. This is around what is at risk and what do we want to make better and how do we want to create a different future for how we interact, for how we experience the world as individuals and as members of communities. And so for me as a scientist, right, that's a difficult lesson to think about how I show up as a person and not as my identity as a scientist sort of exclusively, right? And then part of that is difficult because we get trained to train the person out of the scientist in many ways, right? And so for me, a lot of the ways in which I approach this is really talking about how it impacts my life and my child and importantly, the future I want to help shape. So it's less about the negative impacts and the fact that we've warmed, right? That's part of the story. It's a through line, but it's not the heart of the narrative, right? And the heart of the narrative, again, brings us back to this idea of opportunity, of saying we understand that there are many things at risk, but there are many ways in which we can think about how to design and do and partner and collaborate differently. And at the heart of that, some of it, right, we get down to the data when we think about what decision is quote unquote best, right? But I think we're even trying to challenge what counts as valuable data, what counts as something quantifiable, right? We think a lot about, I'm helping the state of Minnesota think about its metrics for community resilience. And we really, really, really want to be able to put everything in a tabular spreadsheet and tally up a number and say, this was the impact. But I think when we really think about what we're trying to achieve in terms of addressing climate change, it's not all clean and easy and trackable in a database, right? It's the stories, it's the lived experiences, it's the trying something, innovating and failing, right? But learning from whatever happened in the community that maybe was partly to address climate, but maybe at the heart of it was motivated by something totally different, right? And so I think some of it is thinking about how is climate part of the story, maybe not the entire story. I think really thinking about how we integrate this idea of a climate change today and a climate change tomorrow in many of the decisions and discussions that we're already having. And quite frankly, that means empowering other voices than the climate scientists, right? And I say this from the perspective of a climate scientist, right? It's not necessarily my voice that's needed. And I think there's been a weight put disproportionately on climate scientists to sort of be the people raising the alarm. And we've been ineffective, right? And I think we've been ineffective for a variety of reasons, but one of which is that it's not an alarmist story. It can be, right? But I think Huda has made some really powerful points about the way in which we interact with one another and as human beings and what's resonant and what is going to motivate us to act, right? And for me, at the end of the day, that is the hardest thing, right? Is we are ultimately trying to get people to think about and behave and do and innovate in different ways, right? And that is hard, right? It's behavior change in some ways, but even harder is that we can't prescribe what that behavior change is for a lot of the things when we think about climate resilience, because again, they come back to people and place. And so, I mean, I think really Huda probably has better answers to this question, but I think those are many of the pieces that I grapple with, right? I think we have a tendency to do exactly what I just did, right? Which is just lead with all these numbers that ultimately feel really meaningless. But if we place them in experiences, they become much more powerful. And the things that we care about as humans, right? Which often comes back to place and people. And so I think those are really, really parts of the narratives we need to be building and in my case, practicing more.
Thank you, Heidi. And Huda, tell us, what are some, as you talk about these stories, what are some tools that you use? And how can we talk about connecting to our environment, to our space?
Yeah. So, a couple things. First, we really lean on a question that's rooted in abundance. So just really starting with the perception that we all care for place, and that's it's already there. And so we ask, how do you care for place? How do you celebrate place? So we don't come in with this is, these are what other, this is what you should be doing. We just want to hear from people, from their own wisdom, and really with that learning mindset and just really curious, like you're doing a great job. We all care for Minnesota. How do you care for place? And just starting there and see where it takes us. And with the expectation that there's an abundance of stories and wisdom out there. And we're just there to learn from the different communities. And then the second piece is really early on, we've been really intentional about the language that we use. So we stay away from talking about climate change or talking about environmentalism or conservation or some of those very scientific but also politicized terms that can divide. Instead, we talk about love and caring for place. And so that's what we lean into as much as possible. And with that, we've seen that it opens doors, it's invitation, people become more open and let their guard down, especially as we try to engage outside of the metro, just leaning into that and just putting out there, we know you care for place. You're in forestry or you're in farming or you're hunting and fishing, but we know you care for place. So that's not what's on the table. Just tell us how you do it. And then people get excited and are open and share with us what it is that they're doing. So the two tools really is just staying away from divisive language that have become divisive, as well as just going in with the question and the intention to learn and operating from a place of abundance.
Thank you so much, Huda, for that. I think that's very key in terms of just even engaging, like when you start with that question and you start with a question that comes from that place, as you mentioned, of abundance. I think that's very powerful. Well, we are going to be moving on to some questions from the chat. So if anyone has any other questions, feel free to drop them in. So one of the questions that we have here is, what are some of the top interventions that philanthropy should invest to help communities most impacted by the extremes to prepare and navigate the consequences of climate change on their lives and their communities? So if either of you want to talk briefly, I don't know if Heidi, you were talking a little bit more as to kind of like that adaptation and some of the work that you're doing throughout Minnesota.
Yeah, I can take a first pass, I think, at what would be a really long list, but I think at the high level, as I sort of reflect on what we've been hearing in community, and as we are sort of receiving phone calls from support, thinking about what are the pieces that we're really trying to strive for to put in place in Minnesota. And I think where I think there's a really important role for philanthropy is really thinking about durable capacity and coordination. And again, this is in the context of like, how do we help communities effectively understand their risks and then manage those in a way that is right for the landscape, for the community, for the needs and desires of that place. And often what we see are these sort of A lot of grants, for example, and even some philanthropic sort of based RFPs are really looking for sort of these novel innovations and kind of really exciting kind of one-off projects that I think sometimes lead to fleeting impact. And so when I think about what it means for really preparing communities for climate, that means durability. That means dedicated capacity, right? We really need to be thinking about how, yes, do we innovate? How do we serve and create new ideas and experiment? But I think also, how do we sustain? And that becomes a really big challenge. I know that there are many grants and those that come from the state of Minnesota. I've seen many colleagues, and even in my short time here in Minnesota, just a couple of years, they have these really exciting positions as sustainability coordinators for a community, or helping to integrate climate change into comprehensive planning. And their positions are grant funded and they're around for 1 year, or they have 18 months and then they leave, right? Because there are other demands, right? You have to figure out how you're gonna continue to be employed, right? And so I think durability and coordination are really important roles in thinking about how do you provide that sustained capacity. I think, of course, the federal landscape in the US has just changed profoundly with the Inflation Reduction Act, and there are lots of resources, but a continued lack of clarity, and this is true for a lot of federal programs, on how to access those dollars and how to have the capacity to access those dollars. There are a lot of roadblocks, so thinking about really important skills like grant writing and coordinating and helping communities made aware of what their eligibility is for this often meaningful amounts of money, that I think leads into the last piece, which is thinking about how to support implementation of ideas. We increasingly see lots of plans and lots of visions and ideas and requests for what we might want to do or implement on the landscape or support in a community. And there's a growing disconnect between a plan and a practice or implementing. And so to the extent that we can take all of these increasingly rich plans that involve community voice and need, and turn those into tangible action, I think there's an opportunity there to really make a difference. And in some cases, put into practice the idea or the infrastructure or the thing that then is the leverage point for even more resources to implement an entire plan or to transform an entire community's built environment, right? I think we are sitting at the precipice of a lot of change. And I think there are just some small barriers, seemingly big, but often I think there are solutions and people in place to help, but we haven't coordinated and we don't have the sort of durable platform for doing that and providing that coordination. So a few ideas, maybe not concrete, but I think sort of really thinking about systems and how they interact to support and sustain are a really important role.
Thank you, Heidi. And Huda, even with your work with Minnesota Upstream and with your background in public health, what are some interventions that you see that could be helpful for philanthropy to do with those communities that are mostly impacted?
Yeah. Oh, communities. I mean, just getting out the way, funding for these communities to participate and lead, and just investing in them to do what they know needs to be done, and just getting out the way. I think that's, in a nutshell, that's it. And then additionally, I would also say narrative change is really important, particularly around this topic. We've seen that the alarmist narrative is not working. And then again, many communities also don't see themselves reflected in the current narrative at all. I didn't when I first, took on this project. I'm working with communities that are focused on getting their basic needs met and surviving. And now, so the language needs to be more engaging. The stories, the narrative needs to be more engaging. Even for natural English speakers, we've heard, don't really identify with some of the language. It just feels cold and scientific and don't feel connected to it. So I think investing in that is really important and much more inclusive for lack of a better term, layman, you know, language that people can see themselves, or all different communities can see themselves reflected in, is super important as well.
Thank you, Huda. And I also want to just a brief reminder that we do have a survey out. If you can take it, it will help us inform the way that we can construct these sessions in the future and get feedback from all of you. I believe we do have time for one last question, which is directed specifically to you, Huda, but I think, Heidi, you can have a lot of input to talk about just storytelling and celebrating space. So the question that we're hearing here is, has Upstream worked to bridge differences with communities or bring people together through those shared stories?
Yeah, I mean, it's fairly early for us. We just went live. That said, so right now we're focused on individual story collection from communities, individual community story collection. But I think where you can see the weaving happening is really who's currently shaping our work. So we, like I said, we have folks from, you know, rural Minnesota. We have folks from, you know, that have a certain, as well as people from the metro. And then we have folks that, you know, have different political ideologies on different ends of the spectrum, all who have committed and have been sitting at the table with us for the past year and a half as we got this work off the ground, who are sharing their stories about how they care for place, and that value of caring for place is what has them sitting across from someone who they actively work against or would not really, you know, share same ideologies with, without, you know, without giving too many examples about that. But yeah, so that's the level that we're at right now. We have about 25 folks that are doing that are from various backgrounds, that this shared value of caring for place is what brought them to the table. And we're working on, you know, story collection from individual communities who we then hope to, you know, weave together and bring together through convenings, regional convenings initially, and then maybe a more of a statewide convening, you know, around this idea of shared value of caring for place. I'm not sure if I answered the question.
Yes, you did. Thank you. Thank you, Huda, for that. I really appreciate it. Heidi, do you have any examples, or maybe in terms of how some of the work that you've done has bridged the divide in this topic, or what are some tools that you use to bridge that?
Yeah, I think maybe I'll sort of end talking less about tools and maybe a sort of good news story, which is, I think, when we think about communication and communication around these issues, while it is certainly a partisan issue, and there is a very loud minority of people who are skeptics of climate change, we see in national polling, and actually we are releasing some Minnesota-based poll results next week, looking at climate opinions and concerns for Minnesotans, and a significant majority of Minnesotans from across the state, from across political affiliations and age groups, are concerned about climate and its impacts in Minnesota. And importantly, a majority have hope that we are going to act and respond to confront the challenge. And I think that was surprising for me to see come out of the data, but there's not only an identification that there's a real problem, but also that there is hope and a desire for action. Again, across the state, across generational divides, across party affiliations, we see an urgency and a desire and critically hope for doing something. And so as we think about how we communicate and what we communicate and how we convene people, I think we often give a lot of credit or maybe an overweight to people who might not think like us, or we might perceive them to not be in agreement that there is a challenge, and maybe there's this opportunity again that I keep coming back to. So I think that's part of the narrative that many of us have heard and that we sort of are surrounded by. And I think when we think about climate conversations and effective dialogue and interventions, I think it's really, I think Huda's illuminated so many of the important characteristics of having effective dialogue in this space and really moving towards meaningful change, that really I think we need to try to minimize the weight that we are currently incorrectly placing on people not being concerned or it being this highly partisan topic. It's certainly partisan. Now it's more partisan around what solutions do we implement, not that there's a problem. And again, I think that changes the conversation and changes how we can show up in conversations, because it's pivoted towards not a belief system or is this real, but rather to what can we do and how do we do it? And we need to do something. And therein lies an entirely different opportunity for a conversation, right? It's about what do we do? What are our shared values? And that at the heart is definitely a better, more effective conversation that's more likely to lead to change. And so I think we have to start to shake that sense that this is something that people don't want to talk about, or they don't care about, or they don't perceive as a problem. And I think really center it in many of the very real world and important opportunities and pathways that Huda's outlined. But I think the last thing I just say is one thing we do as an organization that I think we should all be doing more of, and that is celebrating success and giving gratitude. We hear a lot of bad news stories about climate change, and rarely are we celebrating leadership in unexpected and maybe expected places. And we know that acts of gratitude lead to people repeating those behaviors for which they've received gratitude. And so I think we just need to start thinking about how we honor and celebrate both incremental and innovative change on the landscape, whether that's done by an individual, a collective, a business, an elected leader. I think we hear a lot of bad news. We receive a lot of hate. Rarely are we receiving lots of thank you notes for the work that we do, or Twitter messages or DMs that are thanking one for their efforts. So if we can all go give one act of gratitude today to someone for the work they're doing to help shape a better tomorrow, I think we're all stepping even further in the right direction.
Thank you, Heidi. And that's a great way to just thank the two of you for doing the work that you're doing, for being at the forefront of this work. Huda, I don't know if you have any last comments.
Can I just quickly respond to a question I see here about whether engaging communities to act upon climate change is secondary to meeting basic needs, or
yes, please go ahead.
To be mutually exclusive. I don't think it's secondary at all. And I think when we started thinking about this project several years ago, there was definitely a line where some folks were like, I need to feed my kids. I don't know where I'm going to sleep tonight. I need to get the bills paid. And I see a shift happening where there's, this more focus of, okay, what kind of environment do we have, or what kind of place do we have for our kids? I don't think it's mutually exclusive, but I do think it's something that does go hand in hand. However, if you are, worried about what your kids are going to eat or where you're going to sleep, then no, that's going to come first for you, or you feel oppressed, or you're, for whatever reason, something traumatic is happening in your life besides that, that's going to feel more urgent than this idea of, the world's going to end, the earth is going to implode kind of thinking. So I think it's we need to thread that needle a bit more carefully, because it's not as urgent for some communities than it is for others.
Thank you so much for taking that question, Huda. And I am going to wrap up just with a lot of that message of what is it that folks are doing, and with that message of hope and of gratitude. And I think just for all of us showing up today, we are taking a step closer into doing something about our environment, connected to our environment, and just engaging in this conversation. So with that message of gratitude, thank you, Heidi. Thank you, Huda. Thank you so much for answering the questions, for being part of this conversation. And I know that they have shared their information, so feel free to connect with them directly. Otherwise, you will have access to this recording. So until next time, thank you so much for joining us again today, and have a wonderful rest of your day. Go and enjoy this beautiful environment. Go and spend some time in nature today. Thank you so much.